So Basil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Basil Peters. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. I've been an angel investor for over 20 years, and I've got a small angel fund. And the passion that I have for angel investing is about the part that I like the best, which is the exit.
How do you know a great entrepreneur when you see one?
Boy, that's sure the hard question. Knowing a great entrepreneur is not an easy thing to be able to do. And I'm not sure that I'm very good at it, because I certainly made my share of the wrong decisions. But that great entrepreneur always has a passion, there's an enthusiasm, there's a fire there burning that gives them this drive to succeed. And I think that's one of the factors that I look for. But other than that, they have all kinds of interesting characteristics, lots of which make them difficult to invest in. But when you find that right one, they can sure make you a nice return on your investment.
That's for sure. What kinds of investment situations do you steer away from?
I think the kinds of investments that I steer away from are two types. One of them is that when I come in, I see that the cap table and the whole structure has already gotten messed up, to use a polite term that we don't usually use in real life, messed up to the point where it's going to be an enormous amount of work to fix it. And a lot of times what I'm finding is I'll just walk away from those types of investments. And for me, the other ones that I will run away from are the ones where the entrepreneur's plan is to go and look for some follow-on venture capital funding. Now, I've been a venture capital fund manager for 5 years. I know how that model works, and I just don't have the patience for those 10 or 15-year exits. I much more prefer to have things that I can invest in where I have a chance to get my money back in 2, 3, or 4 or 5 years.
Me too. What was your biggest surprise ever as an investor?
My biggest surprise was early on, after I'd been a successful entrepreneur and I had some money and I invested in some companies, and I had a clear belief that the entrepreneur was heading in the wrong direction, towards a cliff, in fact. And after spending a considerable amount of time with the entrepreneur, explaining the reasons, trying to coach them, and having them listen carefully and nod, realizing that their actual tendency is to do what they think, not what their mentors are going to tell them. And after watching the second one drive it off the cliff, I began to realize that mentoring is a lot more difficult than I originally thought. And a lot of times, even when they seem to be listening, they're not really changing what they're doing.
Isn't it the truth? What's the best way to get a meeting with you?
Boy, that's a hard question.
I didn't tell you these were going to be easy questions, did I?
Getting a meeting is always a challenge. And my problem, the biggest problem I have in life these days is there are so many interesting companies, so many interesting people, so many fascinating things to talk about in this rapidly changing world that scheduling is always a challenge. And even for the CEOs that I've invested in, they tell me it's kind of hard to get a meeting with me, but perseverance is probably the only, like most of us, is the only answer I can give.
What entrepreneur behavior drives you nuts?
Well, I think the entrepreneur behavior that drives me nuts the most is when you have something valuable to share, and because they're entrepreneurs, it's their nature, sort of like teenagers, not necessarily to be good at listening yet. And when you have something valuable, something that might make the entire difference between success and failure, sometimes it's hard to get that across. And the only thing that saves me is that I know when I was a young entrepreneur, I was impossible. Luckily, I had a couple of angels who were really smart, and they had some interesting techniques, which I'm going to keep secret, to get my attention when they needed to. And some of them were around the fact that they didn't give us all the money up front, and that was one of the things that got my attention when they needed to.
If you had to describe your core investing philosophy in a couple of words, how would you describe it?
My core investment philosophy is to exit early and exit often.
Is it the jockey or the horse?
You know, the jockey-horse thing, I have had many hundreds of enjoyable hours debating that in individual situations, and I had seen both. I've seen things where there was a brilliant idea, which might have been an accident, and an average team that made a fabulous return. I've also seen brilliant entrepreneurs who had 2 or 3 bad ideas in a row, but made the 3rd or 4th one work. So I think there's some that are both, which is why I think we'll continue to have the question about jockey or the horse forever.
Last question for you. If you could give the world of entrepreneurs one piece of advice via this video interview, what would that one piece of advice be?
The one thing I think entrepreneurs could do better is to time their exits better. To have the ability that I lacked as an entrepreneur to look forward in time and imagine that there was going to be a perfect moment to sell their company and to sell it around that time instead of doing what most entrepreneurs do and what I admit that I did, which is to wait too late and still end up exiting, hopefully, but for less. And if you could do timing better, they have higher returns. Plus, they have all these years of their life that they didn't need to work on their company because they could have sold it for more earlier if only they had perfect insight.
And I lied. One last question. What's the best way to get a hold of your book?
My book's available on its own website, earlyexits.com, or on Amazon, or just Google or send me an email. I'm always happy to help you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.